Hello, Cliff.
Hold on one second, Sam. I'll join you when I can. I'm just finishing up a traffic study.
Oh, really? You're working on a traffic study, are you? Yeah.
It's important. I've got some numbers and stuff in front of me. I thought I might run outside and block people from driving and see how that affects them.
This
It's important scientific research.
unbelievable. It couldn't happen to a better guy, and I'm not talking about you. I'm obviously talking about Chris Christie. Speaking of scared and worried about future elections and doing things in private and in secret, let us turn our gleeful
Traffic
eyes.
studies in secret never work out well, Sam.
I am now shifting my seat to actually face towards the west. Where I can see the smokestacks and the open flames burning from the industrial parks in New Jersey. Let's talk about what's happened with Chris Christie. We've obviously been covering it quite a bit here, so let's work to the most recent developments. Last night, Rachel Maddow had a great reportorial piece proposing an alternate theory, I should say, as to why Fort Lee was specifically targeted for retribution. The story that we have been assuming was the reason for this political vendetta was that the mayor of Fort Lee would not endorse Chris Christie. And Chris Christie made a very big show of it at his press conference, where he was talking about how sad he was and how the soul searching involved with having these people lie to his face, and just unbelievable betrayal that he was subject to, and how he had this ultimate opportunity to pass the test of leadership, which was to find out that your closest aides have been lying to you for so long that you go out and you fire them after 24 hours, and it being clear that
Or, when they resigned 2 months ago and you didn't feel the need to sort of ask them what was going on since then.
Let's not split hairs here. This has been very traumatic for the governor. Well, Rachel Maddow floated another theory that this had more to do with a conflict dealing with the appointing of justices to the New Jersey Supreme Court. And we're going to put a link to her story. But the short of it is that this was about political retribution for the Democratic state representative Loretta Weinberg, who also is the Senate Majority Leader in New Jersey, who has been orchestrating the blocking of Christie nominees to the state Supreme Court and other nominees because of an unprecedented move that Christie had taken earlier in not renominating a sitting Supreme Court, which had never happened in 65 years. So this is fascinating because Christie made a big show of saying, like, I don't know who the mayor of Fort Lee is. We're not even interested in his endorsement. That's why.
Of course, until pictures came out that he had met with him personally.
Even then, like,
I'm not saying that. I'm not. By the way, I'm not saying that means that that's why. I'm just saying it's just another one of those little lies.
Well, he had said it's possible I've met him, but I wouldn't recognize him. He said I've probably met him at a photo op, but the point is.
No, he said I couldn't. I mean, just because I watched the thing, he said I couldn't pick him out of a lineup.
Right after saying
if
I
met
probably met him
personally and was introduced to you as the mayor of a decent-sized city in the state you govern.
Who knows? That's irrelevant, because I'm convinced the reason why he focused on that part of it was because it was the most believable part. And if you go back, and to the extent that anybody's rebutted Maddow's theory, right, at this point, it's all because Weinberg's not mentioned at all in the transcripts. But these are heavily redacted transcripts. And we should say at this point that according to the New York Times, and I've talked to a couple of people about this now, these were subpoenaed by the Senate panel that's doing the investigation. When you have a legislative body that subpoenas something as opposed to a grand jury, the person providing these documents, that would be in this case Wildstein, has the ability to redact them before they give them to the legislative body. He chose to redact them, and according to his attorney, we picked and chose what to redact based upon what was relevant to your investigation. Now, anybody could see a problem with this. But if you were Wildstein and you wanted to make it look like, there's nothing here, you would lead people down essentially a red herring, that being This was retribution against the Fort Lee mayor. And so it's quite clear. I mean, the two biggest factors from this are who was the other person in the conversation about the children.
That's right.
And, I spoke to Pap about this the other day. Mike Papantonio, as you know, is my co-host on Ring of Fire. He has done millions of these type of suits. He's been involved in litigation like this. He said that's usually there's one of two people that redacted identity could be. Either a weak link who Wildstein feels would cave first and expose it, or someone who is higher on the food chain than the deputy chief of staff. Now, there's probably about 4 deputy chiefs of staff who work for Christie, and they are usually body people. In other words, people who know everything there is to know about the governor, and therefore they can be trusted because they already know all this stuff.
Right. But in addition to that, it's also worth pointing out, which people did last night, maybe you among them, I don't remember, I know you were on Chris Hayes' show, which is his also a higher up would be his chief of staff, who also happens to be nominated to become attorney general right now.
Yes. And he's going to face some questioning, I imagine, in that confirmation hearing. And you've got to think about it in terms of this, okay? You've got Wildstein. Now, we don't know the contact that Wildstein's had with the administration since he resigned, which apparently Christie asked him no questions about. It didn't even occur to him that this guy's resigning because he did something wrong, which does not jibe with Christie's attempt to say that it still could have been a traffic study for all I know at this point. We also know that Christie never asked Kelly, his deputy chief of staff.
How could it still be a traffic study? I mean, the thing that's that's the easiest part of the whole thing, right? It's sort of like the minute those two guys resigned, do we have a traffic study? If we did one, give it to me. Which is what, I mean, you have to put yourself in the place of these guys and say, what would you do if you were in the same situation? And I'm sorry, it is simply not believable that somebody would have 2 senior aides of theirs resign from something that could be a scandal that if you're just finding out about this, oh my God, this could affect me, you'd want to know right away, is there a traffic study? But he still doesn't know. Could be, could not be. I mean, to me, that of the many lies and weak links is the biggest one.
And the other aspect of this, I mean, well, so the point being on that redacted identity, this is my theory. I'm just going to float this out here, and it may turn out that I may have egg all over my face, but I'm going to guess that the person sending those texts was the governor. I mean, this is pure speculation on my part, but it would be irresponsible at this point not to speculate. And
I think it would be too.
I will also say that I do not believe it was from his phone. It is perfectly consistent. And having talked to former deputy chief of staffs of New Jersey governors, that Christie would simply use his chief of staff's phone to text, more out of convenience than anything else. Because the day, people are arguing, like, why would Christie go out there and hammer this so hard? Why would he walk this tightrope? And the reason is he's got no other choice. This ship, went out to sea. This train left the station the day that Christie said, I was out there moving the cones. He went all in. That was his strategy to shut this down. And when he did that, he was left with no other choice but to deny, because if any of this comes out after that, he's dead in the water.
He's already obstructed justice. He's already in the position of this literally could be unlawful imprisonment, I just read. I mean, again, I'm not a lawyer, but a number of lawyers are floating that people were stuck up on this bridge, and that's a form of imprisonment. I mean, there's so many things that can hit him now that there's no reason not to. I mean, he's either getting away with this or he's being indicted probably. So, you're right. He's going to go out on that limb. He's going to deny, laugh, mock, say it's ridiculous, apologize, but I didn't do it, and all that sort of stuff, because he has to. But I agree with you. Those texts either came from him or somebody higher up. Anything that's redacted or not being shared when other things are being shared is immediately suspect. I mean, again, I haven't done the stuff like Pat, but I was a communications director for the state treasurer here in Ohio, and I've been on the other side of records requests for your emails and for things, and so I know what goes on here to a certain degree, and of course people are going to try to what they release to you, what they put on top, and what they put on the bottom of the pile. There's all sorts of ways they're going to try to make it so you don't find what's in there.
And people should remember,
I can just tell you,
the reason why we've seen these redacted, subpoenaed documents is because Wildstein put them out there 24 hours before he was to testify. And I don't know if there's been any communications between Wildstein and the administration. That would be very dangerous at that point. Once they've gone out and they've gone into full sort of crisis management mode, that would be very dangerous because inevitably those things could have been subpoenaed. But I think, back before this became an issue, I think there was such arrogance and hubris on the part of this administration because, Christie has a long history of doing this type of stuff and never getting called on it. I think
and
it's
that's
quite
the other
possible.
Part that makes us
This is Wildstein's opportunity by sending all that stuff out to the media to at the very least gain some control of where the story goes. Because the alternate of that is that he just goes in front of that panel and says, I plead the fifth, that the administration has no way of knowing what's in those redacted subpoenaed documents because they're being subpoenaed by Democrats now because they control the state assembly. And there's no opportunity for the administration to craft their story. I think they're in very, very deep water. And I think the question isn't whether or not Christie has 2016 hopes anymore. I think the question is, will he be governor in 2015?
I agree. I think the question is, will he be indicted by then? I mean, here's the thing. You just learn this when you do this political. When you do this kind of work, I bring in the story of, how I started writing the book I started writing on John McCain. People have patterns of behavior. And I remember you for a while had a lot of fun with it, which I enjoyed, Sam, when I used to do interviews with you about the book, and you said that McCain won, Air Force One would be Trollope won. I maybe you remember that as fondly as I do,
yes.
Because he referred to his wife as a trollop, among other things. And when you saw that already publicly that McCain had this personality where he couldn't stand any criticism and he'd lash out at people, you just knew there was more there. And that's how I was able to find that story about him calling his wife the C word and how he had physically tried to assault Rick Renzi over a disagreement and all these other things. And my guess is if I had 6 more months to look, I would have found tons more. Because I found other things that I couldn't substantiate, quite frankly, about his temper and about his vitriol. And about when you run into people like this who are deeply insecure and thin-skinned and can't stand any kind of criticism, they lash out. And we've seen this again and again. The guy's done this constantly to people publicly. Stories have come out like the ones in the New York Times and the Washington Post about local political actors who have said something negative about him on radio that they didn't even think was negative, and suddenly they had nominations to higher positions yanked, or they found themselves on the receiving ends of tirades. We've got the story of the Jersey city mayor who refused to endorse him, and suddenly all of his meetings were canceled with all the cabinet members that day. I mean, how many stories do you need like this to believe that it's quite obvious? Occam's razor, folks. How many times do you believe your own lying eyes? This is a guy that has people, aides walk around with their cameras taking pictures and video to post of him yelling at people. This is who he is. This is who he surrounds himself with. I'm sorry, again, in a court of law at this particular moment, can I prove that he did it? Absolutely not. Do I know he did it? Of course he did. Did I know that Anthony Weiner was the one behind sending out his penis to everybody? Of course I did. And, of course, everybody else did, too, before we could prove it. While he was sitting there denying. Right. Oh, of course that's not me. My account was hacked. I have nothing to do with, there's a point where, these guys get so invested that they have to fully deny.
Yes.
And that's where Christie is. But I'm sorry, with Anthony Weiner, I happen to know the pattern of behavior towards women, too, from knowing a few former staffers of his, including an ex-girlfriend of mine who he said some very, let's call it, not so appropriate things to. And when you know these patterns of behavior, whether you know it from knowing people that have worked with them or from having seen them publicly, they don't act this way. These people are recidivists in their behavior. They don't just do this once. There's just no way. There's no way, I will say that right now. I don't care if I have egg on my face and everywhere else, that he was not involved and not heavily involved in what this was, whether it was about a mayor or what sounds maybe more likely now about the Senate Majority Leader, or maybe both of them, because they don't have to be mutually exclusive. It's we hate everybody, every Democrat in Fort Lee, let's go screw them. Right. Whatever it is, he was behind it, as he's behind many other things. And if there's a real investigation, my guess is at the very least a half dozen other examples of things like this where he's used his office to punish people in a way that is frankly criminal will come out.
In terms of those, I mean, people should understand what we're talking about here. This is more of a legal story at this point than it is a political one, because that's what's going to be driving the politics of this. And we're also going to be seeing, I think, the primary source of information is ultimately going to come from a class action suit filed by 6 New Jersey residents, some of whom were stuck in that traffic. And that discovery is going to be pretty crazy. I mean, the New Jersey...
You know where else we're going to get some great stuff from, in addition to that, Sam? We're going to get some great stuff from Oppo researchers for Rand Paul, Ted Cruz,
Absolutely.
Scott Walker. Everybody who... The other thing 100%. That I remember saying about McCain, which is an important thing, too, is first of all, you've got political rivals who are going to go after you no matter what. But the other thing is, when it's one thing when you're berating teachers and people on the Tea Party are like, yeah, that's awesome. But when you're a complete a-hole to all of your own people, and you rule by fear, once fear is gone, the knives come out. McCain, only got 3 or 4 endorsements among his colleagues in the Senate when he ran in 2000 because they'd all been on the receiving end of how this guy had treated them. And so, at that point, it wasn't even just about the fact that George Bush looked like a consensus candidate. They weren't going to support McCain because they all hate him. Because and that's the thing with Christie is that you're going to have these rivals of his produce this Oppo, and with some of them it's personal too. Rand Paul obviously hates him, and he hates Rand Paul. But also you're going to have lots of other Republican operatives, and you've already started to see it. People that have been attacked by this guy, thrown under the bus by this guy, and there are many of them. Not, of course, including the most recent ones, the past few days. They all have contacts in the media. They all know where producers are and where people are. And I think actually the more damage is going to come to him from the Republicans than is going to come to him from the Democrats. It's going to be like John McCain's South Carolina primary. Just wait.
And
what comes at this
two
guy.
Other things I want to note on this story, because sadly we're not going to get to the Frank Luntz stuff, I think, with Cliff. I don't know.
Sadly for Frank Luntz, who's very sad also.
But
right
the
now.
thing is, the Frank Luntz stuff is evergreen, just like his hair in a way. We
should talk about it next week just for fun.
I almost want to keep that story for you. But there's 2 other points to note here. One is that, I should say 3 or two points. One is that, and this came up last night on Hayes' show too. Right now, what's going on is this is where guys like Christie, guys like Paul, guys like Rubio are lining up, and guys like Scott Walker are lining up their big donors. And right now, these big donors are looking at this, and this is putting a big question mark on Christie. And do you want to put that money in there, that early money that acts like yeast, as they say? Do you want to put that in right now on Christie? And I think there's a lot of people who are now just taking their pens and their checkbooks and putting them down for a second and waiting. And this is going to hurt Christie. And it's also going to hurt, and I should say, it's also going to hurt other Republicans around the country right now, because remember that Chris Christie was just elected the Republican Governor Association head. And what that position does is it allows you to go and raise money around the country, but it also, he was
going to go raise money for congressional races and be the guy. Now no one's going to want him anywhere near their
Nobody's going to want them anywhere near him. But he's not going to resign that position.
Who had a brand for not being crazy.
He's not going to want to resign that position, because if he has to quit that job, that position, that's like red flag. It's over. And so
you're right. It hurts that's a great analysis, because it hurts the party beyond him, because he was their guy. He was like, again, to make the comparison, he was like McCain or Giuliani or Arnold Schwarzenegger or others in the past who had this sort of view beyond politics, where they were loved by the centrist establishment, and that's all going to crash now. And some of these guys are going to have to decide. You bring up the early money is like yeast. They have to decide. By the way, don't bring up yeast too much around Chris Christie. He'll get hungry. But I digress. Some of these other guys, who maybe were thinking they might not run, or they might. Your Jeb Bushes, your Scott Walkers. I think Scott Walker is going to run regardless, and others who the establishment people like. I think even a guy like a John Thune, who has thought about it and whatever, but maybe thought he couldn't get in there because there wasn't enough space. No pun intended. Now there is.
Right. Now I want to just end on this tweet that I saw from McKay Coppins, who writes for BuzzFeed. GOP donors I'm hearing from off the record are not happy with Christie, but reluctant to go on the record bashing him, some citing Rush Limbaugh's defense. How twisted and warped that even the donors, never mind the elected officials, the donors fear Rush Limbaugh. This is just that party. I mean, this is not something that surprises me, but it surprises me. It's stunning. It's stunning.
It shouldn't be. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the Republican Party these days that you say to yourself, you're ready for it, and it shouldn't surprise you, and then it does.
I mean, I've said this kind of stuff about Rush Limbaugh being the intellectual pillar, the president of the Republican Party for years, and even I am just like, what? Even the donors are afraid of Rush Limbaugh? That's just...
They are. There's a few power centers, Rush Limbaugh, Fox News, a few of the corporate, trade groups and others at the NRA that they all kowtow to.
It's unbelievable.
And Rush is an important part of that ecosystem at this point in time. I think Rush identifies with Christie because they're both sort of loudmouth fat guys who, and that's sort of in a way, temperamentally, we've talked about this before, is more important in the Republican Party these days a lot of the time, even than issues, although I think issues would cause some trouble for Christie. But that was what he was counting on, is that by being an a-hole to liberals, that would get people to overlook some of his support for, modest support for gay rights and gun control, and not huge support, but things that of course, the Republicans are like stepping way over the line.
Right.
But in any case, in the end, I will just say what I said way back when, which is I don't think now he's going to even make it to a presidential race. I think you're right. The question is, will he remain governor of New Jersey? But these people that think this guy can win in a primary, I will just remind again what happened to Charlie Crist, who's now running as a Democrat in Florida, when Rubio started showing the pictures of him hugging Obama. Remember that on the boardwalk after President Obama was successfully reelected after Christie embraced him, which, by the way, I now have no doubt was due to his anger at Mitt Romney for not picking him as VP, another McCain-like trait, that was about revenge, too, and had nothing to do with Sandy in the end. He won Barack Obama a teddy bear on the boardwalk. If you're a Republican ad maker and you can't do something with that to destroy Chris Christie in a Republican primary, you have no business being a Republican ad maker. So it doesn't even matter. I don't think he can. I don't think he can win, but he'll never get there. I think he's toast.
Cliff
It'll be fun to watch.
It is going to be a lot of fun to follow this story because aside from everything else, Chris Christie is an odious, in my estimation, odious politician.
I agree. Just a terrible human being. And, again, seeing what happened to Liz Cheney and Chris Christie in the same week is almost enough to make me just want to go on vacation.